This is a table view, right? My goal is that I'm going to create a bunch of slots in our app, and then I'm going to populate that information into this table view. Here I have a create sloth view controller. So here's what my create sloth view controller does. I'm not going to use this action because I didn't use it anymore. My create sloth view controller has no longer a name outlet because I couldn't put this together in the time of our meeting while I did it in the background. It's got a speed stepper and an appendages stepper. Wow, good. It has an IB action to a button that says create. Let me show you. There's the speed stepper, the appendages stepper, the create button. I wasn't able to get this ready in that time to show you the speed of that thing as I updated the stepper. So know that the initial value of the speed is 2. I'm going to make it 1. The lowest value is 1. The highest value is 10. For appendages, it starts with 1, goes up to 4. When I go and create a sloth, so hit that button at the bottom, I create a new instance of sloth. And then I dispatch in the utility queue, persist that sloth. So save that sloth. What is all this stuff going on? I'll tell you in just a sec. But I dispatch in a different queue to try to create that sloth.
This queue was quality of service?
Yes, quality of service. Were you just guessing? Or?
I mean, sorry.
Yes, that's great.
We use that with waiter rating.
Yeah. So the quality of service is you saying, like, you're kind of giving priority. You're picking the priority of the queue. And this utility comes from, like, that list of queues, like user interactive, main, default, blah, blah. Utility is meant to be like a background thread.
Is that why they're attached, like, the value as a number? Or that's
Let's see.
Is that one enum, like, its value is equal to 7? I don't know. Just thinking on it.
That was on the... I'm not quite sure. What? Yeah, that was for the directories. Thank you. Tired. We're going to try to save it, and then we're going to pop back one level on the view controller, on the navigation controller. So we're going to go from the create back to that table. On my table, what I do is I have that table view. Its data source is self. The count of rows is slots.count. We've seen most of this before. I use a subtitle cell, say the speed is something and the appendages is something. And then the only change I've made is I loaded the data in my view will appear, which occurs after the view did load, and also occurs when I navigate back to it, right? So I'm reloading the data when I get into this view. I load data.
So you need that when you are going back from closing, popping off.
Correct. So if I just created a sloth, I need this load data to trigger at some point. My view is already loaded, so I need it to be when it appears in the view lifecycle. My load data is going to set slots by going and checking this persistence manager I've set up. If it doesn't work, it's going to print an error. Let me show you those persistence managers. So first I made a generic persistence helper. So for any type T that is codable, they can use this persistence helper. For any type that is codable, I can get and save new objects using this guy. What are some questions you have? How does it work? The get works just how we said before. You go find the location of the URL, and then you decode the stuff. Save works in reverse. You try to get, hold on. No. Save, boom. Yeah, okay, hold on. Tired, okay. Save works in a similar way, except here's a specific thing we want to make sure we're doing. let's say I have 3 objects. Slot 1, slot 2, slot 3. My save is getting called in that create view controller, and we'll look into how this gets implemented for slots more specifically. But I don't just want to save that object. I want to save it to the list of slots I already have. So if there are already 3 slots and I just created a 4th, I want to go and get all those slots. And then I want to add my slot to the end of that array of slots. Yes. There's a lot of slots. This is for nailing. When I call get objects, it gives me back an array of whatever objects that type T is. When I'm going to save an object, if I just save that one object, it's going to overwrite all the objects before it. And so before I save it, I want to get those objects that might or might not exist. Worst case, I get back an empty array, which would be fine. And then I append to it. Yeah, go ahead.
Is that why you're returning an empty array and get objects?
That's why right here, yes. If I'm getting objects and I actually can't find a file called that, I'm just returning an empty array. And we'll talk about this right, because in a second that'll be really helpful. Even for an empty array like that, you can always append to it, and that gets you something with a count of 1. So I get, I append, then I try to encode, and then I write it. And that write, if you remember, will write the file if it does not already exist. And so if we get objects and that file doesn't exist, we start an array of 1 object, and then we save to whatever that URL is. Ask me some questions. Levi.
What's the difference between try and do try catch? Because it throws that you don't have to do the catch.
Yeah. So I would do a do catch with this save itself. It'll throw that error. Logically, there are like 4 different ways we could have arranged that. I'm just being lazy right here. Also, we didn't set up for it to throw an error really in here. So, Ian.
You said the write function will write a file if it doesn't exist already. If it exists already,
Then it's just writing over it. And that's why we have to get the full data that's there before adding data to it and writing over.
If I'm going to write over something and say my slot had 3 arms, now it's 4 arms, is it rewriting? I know it's rewriting like for each of the 4 for the appendages. Is it also then rewriting the name, and is it also rewriting, like, is it rewriting all of the variables, or is it just rewriting the one that you're changing?
Depends how you set it up. So if you wanted to change that, you might have to get those objects and then look for the specific one you're looking at and then change that value before writing it again. But ultimately, it's going to be like, go look for the data, change it how you need to, and then save it. This one is just specifically like we're adding 1 new thing. That's how this save works. Should I keep going? Okay. Because this persistence helper is going to be used in a specific type, when you use this thing, you're going to say the file name for wherever you want to save that type. So you'll see in a second, I'm going to use a file called slots.plist to save this stuff. Then I've got these things we created before. Help me find the document directory. Help me find a file in that directory. File name is just something I'm going to initialize. And then URL is how I'm going to find the location of the file name, so slots.plist, somewhere in the documents directory. Weird, right? So all become a little clearer when we look at this slots persistent helper. It's got a singleton. It's going to use this persistence helper, which is dealing with type sloth, which itself is codable. And it's going to say initialize that with file name sloths.plist. Now when I want to save a sloth, I go and I save that. So I go and I use my persistence helper and I save a new sloth. When I want to get my sloths, I just do a get objects on that persistence helper. So the thing that's changing here is both the type that our persistence helper is going to be corresponding to, but also very importantly, the file name. The file name is what makes it so that our save and our get slots are looking at the same place. Because the way that persistence helper is implemented, it just goes and it looks for some URL that it creates out of that file name, which is the initializer for a persistence helper, which here we initialize with that file name. So long as this abstracted persistence helper is always looking at the same URL, you should be fine to use this thing if you'd like. In the same way that our network managers got us data, this is set up to take any type, look at the file that you've told them you're going to save and get it from, and then just get and save that stuff. So if you use this guy out of the box, you could create a sloth persistence helper. You could create, I don't know, a person persistence helper. You could create a dog persistence helper, just like we did with all of our API clients. The abstracted layer is this persistence helper, and then the specific for the type that we are using would just be something like a sloth persistence helper. And again, the only difference here is that to read and to write, we're just saying the specific file that you're read and writing to. And we're just saying the type that the persistence helper is dealing with is a sloth type. This type must be codable. This file name could be literally anything. .plist. Let's just do it one more time. We save here and we get here using some type T. That type T, specifically for the sloth persistence helper, is a type sloth, and the place that this stuff is persisted is in our documents directory, some file called sloths.plist. Do you want to see how it works first? It's going to be really exciting.
When you go to work at a company, would you also have one of these as well?
Likely, yes. They'd have a lot of really big things. But you need to know it. So I'm going to give it a speed of something and some appendages. I'll hit create. There's a 4-speed appendage for sloth. That's great. Let's create another one. It's got a speed of 2 and appendages 2. This stuff is not persistence. It could be. Like I could have my model somewhere. But the way we'll test if it's actually persisted is if we run the app again and I don't get a blank screen. So now it's actually persisted. I did save it before, but you couldn't convince me something is persisted just by showing me a screen where you updated it. I'd need to know that the next time I use the app, that stuff is still there. That's how I know it's saved. That's the real nature of persistence. Tell me some stuff. Sam. You could do that, yeah. And in that case, I would probably recommend, like you've seen with a few things from the internet, is creating an ID for slots so that you could go and find it by that ID, some unique identifier. Sunny?
Is there anywhere that we would be able to see slots that you
The zoo? Thanks. That's a good question.
for the 5 words file?
Yeah, it's in the documents directory. Wonder if we could navigate into there. Let's have a little look. CD slop app. CD Xcode workspace. No. There's something called Xcode user data. Let's look in here. David Rifkin.xcode user data. Let's open that. User interface state. I don't think that's it. Go ahead and share data. IDE checklist? No, it doesn't look like it. It's a really good question. Let me see if I can find you a better answer. Documents. Let's hold that. Let me see if I can get you an answer. What else? Where should we start? Start with like the views.
No, we've fixed it
Let-
before. Like the creation
Desktop. Okay, I took this out of the playground, so now it's just some lines of code. We've got something that's codable. Neat. From that something that's codable, we're going to do some stuff. First, we want to find the specific place that we're supposed to save these things.
And again, when we use that file manager, the default URL, it only returns one thing, right?
Yes, but it returns an array with one thing in it. Because it might potentially, had you used some other for in there, it might have given you multiple. So just the return of this function is an array of URLs. Yeah, like we can trust by calling it in this specific way that we're going to get that one URL. Then for that URL, we're just going to write to it some string so that we can say, I want to add a file, I want to look at a file path that's in documents directory. So I just want to take whatever URL we got from looking at documents directory and add to it some name. So back in my app, all that was me finding documents directory and appending path name, appending path component, which is name, which we use to get the URL for whatever we're going to save to here. And I'll talk about the flow of that one more time. Then I've got 3 slots, put them in an array. I find the path to the documents directory specifically called slots.plist. And then when I want to save my slots, I encode slots using a property list encoder. And then I try to write whatever encoded slots is to this URL somewhere in the documents directory, ending with slots.plist, using options atomic, which I would love to tell you more about when I find out more. We've saved it. Let me do it here. So all we did here was we called it, we saved that stuff. Now, in an effort to get those things, I lazily made this an optional return type, but that was because the playground wasn't working great. Works just fine in my app, so don't worry about this specific implementation because you have a more generic one. First, I check if that file exists because I'm trying to find something. If it's not there, then I'm not going to get anything. Then I guard that I can get data from that specific place. Then I try to decode that data into an array of slots and return that slot, or I return that array of slots. That's what we did this morning. In my app, all I did was abstract out that logic so that when I am going to get data, the only difference here is the type that I'm returning and the place that I'm looking. So when we create a new instance of persistence helper, we initialize it with a string for the name of that file that I'm going to be saving to. And then later on, the URL that I'm going to use to actually look at and save to that specific place is using these two things that we created before, so the documents directory and then the file path to that documents directory, and then specifically creating a URL using the name, which for us was slots.plist. So using that name, I'm creating a URL, and that's the URL that I'm looking at when I go to get data and to save data.
Documents in the sandbox file manager, that's used for like just general data, right? And then library would be used for images and video and stuff like that.
No, library would be used for other functionality. They say like don't put any user specific stuff in there. So you like those might be stored elsewhere. Yeah. Yeah. Sunny and then Levi. Okay. Levi and then Levi.
One, could I please see your view controllers so I can see how you call these functions and use them?
Yeah.
And then the other is, when we deal with the error handling, at some point.
We can do that. So my load data is just that get slots, which calls get objects.
That's your issue.
Yes.
Because there's nothing, there's no data that you're trying to pull from APIs. This is just the stuff that's been stored in the computer.
If you were to set up a load data that had to deal with both an API and some persisted data, I would recommend first checking if you have persisted data, then making your API call. And then saving whatever you get from that API call to that plist file.
And slots is some uninstantiated variable that you created.
Yep, just like we've seen a bunch of times with the did set to reload the table view.
And then in your other view controller, when you hit the create button, is that when you call the other save function is?
Yes, I say save it, and then I say whenever that's saved, asynchronously pop back. Sunny?
In your other view controller, when you load the data,
Mhm.
why is that also a try if in your get slots function it's already a try?
Because this one throws. So if it didn't throw, I would have to, or I could do more of like a do catch here. I'm deferring the do catch by throwing this to here. So kind of what Levi said before, when we throw an error, we don't necessarily have to deal with it. The return could be our slots, or it could be that effectively the catch block of doing a do catch here. So no matter what with this try, I'm going to have to catch errors eventually. And I just chose to catch it here.
So if you had in your other function a do catch instead of in this load data function, you wouldn't need the try in the do load data function?
Potentially yes. And this wouldn't necessarily have to throw.
Can we at some point go through all the different options of how you
Oh,
use
yeah.
that data?
For sure. I actually wonder. Let me make a note. Result. Hi. Yeah. For sure. So again, if you were getting information both persisted and off the internet, I would probably recommend trying to get the information from some plist persisted file. And then if that doesn't work, getting it off the internet, you might also need to use like IDs to compare and make sure you have the same ones. For example, if I was getting an array of slots, and this is just purely an example, but it's one of those array functions those higher order array functions that might be helpful. Let's say I got my slots. I might want to do a filter by, I don't know, for example, ID for any IDs that already exist. So I'm not double saving IDs. Just think about that when you are making apps that involve both data locally and data remotely. You're going to want to, what's the word? Not consolidate, but like when you reconcile, you're going to want to reconcile your data, potentially. Albert, do you like my sloth app? Thank you. Aaron, do you like the sloth app?
Yeah.
I think you should make your own. No? Okay. The internal question. Yes, I'm going to push it. Okay.